Ex-husband caught in a shocking situation with ex-wife. What did he do that caused everyone to gasp? Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main characters. Jack and Sarah, a couple who once shared their dreams and lives, had their marriage fall apart after years of ups and downs. Their relationship, once filled with love, turned into a battlefield of misunderstandings and broken trust. After their divorce, they went their separate ways, each carrying their own emotional baggage. Jack, the former husband, had tried to move on, focusing on his career and new relationships, but Sarah always lingered in the back of his mind. Sarah, on the other hand, had built a life of her own, but the past with Jack was never too far behind. A chance encounter would soon bring them face to face once again, but what happened next was something neither of them could have ever expected. Jack found himself in a situation so shocking, it left everyone gasping in disbelief. What did he do that caused this reaction? Well, let's dive into the story and see how it all unfolded. Jack never anticipated the reunion with Sarah would lead to such an unbelievable turn of events. Neither of them were prepared for the unexpected twist that would change everything between them, and this is where our story begins. Jack had not seen Sarah in months, and after their divorce, he never imagined that a simple meeting would stir up so many old emotions. It was supposed to be a casual, business-related encounter. Sarah had called him to discuss some unfinished paperwork regarding their shared assets, and Jack thought nothing of it. He knew it was a professional obligation, something they had both agreed to settle in an amicable way. But as he walked into the coffee shop where they were supposed to meet, he was taken aback by the sight of her. Sarah hadn't changed much on the surface. She still had that same radiant smile and the confident air that always made her stand out. But there was something different about her today. There was a certain tension in the way she held herself, as if she was bracing for something. Jack took a seat across from her, his mind racing, trying to figure out why she looked so on edge. "Jack, I'm glad you could make it," Sarah said, her voice steady but carrying an underlying emotion he couldn't quite place. Jack nodded, offering a polite smile in return. He didn't know it yet, but this simple exchange would be the calm before the storm. The conversation started as expected. They went through the papers, talked about the division of their property, and exchanged a few pleasantries. But the moment Sarah placed a small, folded note in front of Jack, everything shifted. Jack looked at it, confused. "What's this?" he asked, his fingers hovering over the paper. Sarah took a deep breath. "It's something you need to see. It's about the past, about what happened between us," she replied. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He had no idea what she was referring to. The past was something he had tried to move on from, something he thought was buried forever. "Sarah, we don't need to talk about that anymore," Jack said, his voice suddenly lower, more guarded. He didn't want to go down that path again. But Sarah wasn't backing down. "Jack, please just read it. It's important," she insisted. With a sigh, Jack unfolded the note. As his eyes skimmed the words written on it, his face grew pale. He could barely believe what he was reading. The information on the note was a revelation, something so shocking it made him question everything he thought he knew about their past. Sarah had known things that Jack had kept hidden for years, things he never thought anyone would find out. His past mistakes, the secrets he had buried so deeply, were now laid out in front of him, and the weight of the truth hit him like a ton of bricks. "How did you?" Jack started, his voice faltering. Sarah looked at him, her expression one of quiet determination. "I had to know, Jack. And now you do too," she said softly. The air between them was thick with tension as Jack tried to process the enormity of what Sarah had just revealed. His mind raced, his stomach churned. This was more than just an old love story. This was about trust, betrayal, and the dark truths that neither of them had ever fully confronted. Jack's life, everything he had built after the divorce, now felt like it was crumbling before his eyes. Jack's mind was reeling. His heart pounded in his chest as he stared at the note in front of him, still trying to process what he had just read. Sarah had known things that he thought were buried, locked away deep in his past. He had kept his secrets hidden, hoping they would never resurface. But now, everything was unraveling right in front of him. He looked up at Sarah, trying to find some explanation in her eyes. "How could you know this?" he asked, his voice shaky. Sarah met his gaze, her eyes filled with a quiet intensity. "I found out, Jack. I had to know the truth," she said softly. There was no anger in her voice, no bitterness. It was as if she had simply come to terms with the truth, no matter how painful it was. Jack couldn't understand it. How had she found out about the things he had done? The mistakes he had made before their marriage, the things he had never told her. His past was something he wanted to forget, to move on from. But now, it seemed like the past had come back to haunt him, and there was no escape. "I don't know what you expect me to say," Jack replied, his voice growing more defensive. He could feel the walls going up around him again, just like they had during their marriage. It was easier to shut down, to retreat into himself than to confront the reality of what was happening. But Sarah wasn't backing down. "I don't expect anything, Jack," she said, her voice steady. "I just wanted you to know that I know. I needed you to face it, to understand what your actions did. To understand how it affected everything between us." Jack shook his head. This isn't the way to do it," he muttered, looking away. He felt a tight knot form in his stomach. He had always been the one to run from the hard conversations, the difficult truths. And now, here they were, forcing their way into his life once again. Sarah sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of years of hurt. "I didn't want to hurt you, Jack. But I needed to know what really happened. And now I need to understand why you kept it from me for so long." Jack didn't know what to say. His mind was clouded with confusion and shame. The secrets he had hidden from her seemed so small compared to the gravity of what he had just learned. He thought of the years they had spent together, of the love they had shared, and the way everything had ended. He had tried to bury his past, to build a new life without the weight of it dragging him down. But now, that past was front and center, and there was no escaping it. The silence between them stretched on, thick with the tension of unspoken words. Finally, Jack looked at Sarah again, his expression softening. "I never meant to hurt you," he said quietly. "I just didn't know how to tell you. I thought it was better to keep it hidden." Sarah nodded, her expression unreadable. "Maybe you were right. But hiding the truth never makes anything better. It just makes everything worse in the end." Jack felt a sinking feeling in his chest. He had always believed that some secrets were better left untold, that the truth was too painful to confront. But now, as he looked into Sarah's eyes, he realized that hiding the truth had only caused more pain, more distance between them. It was a realization that shook him to his core. He had no idea what the future held, but he knew that this moment, this conversation, would change everything. For better or for worse, the truth was out, and there was no going back. Jack sat in stunned silence, the weight of Sarah's revelation pressing down on him. His thoughts were a tangled mess, and he struggled to grasp the full extent of what had just unfolded between them. Sarah's words echoed in his mind, each one adding more layers to the emotional turmoil he was already feeling. He wanted to apologize, to explain himself, but the words felt inadequate. What could he say that would make any of this better? What could he do to undo the damage that had been done? He had spent so many years burying his past, convincing himself that the secrets he kept were his alone to bear. But now, those secrets were out, and there was no going back. He looked at Sarah, who was sitting across from him, her expression unreadable. The anger or hurt that he had expected to see in her face was absent, replaced by something far more unsettling, quiet acceptance. She had known about the things he had hidden for so long, but she wasn't angry. She was just calm. Sarah, I never meant for any of this to happen, Jack said finally, his voice low. I thought I was doing the right thing by keeping it from you. I thought if I could just move on, you could too. But now, it's clear I was wrong. Sarah met his gaze, her eyes filled with a sadness that Jack hadn't seen in years. Jack, you didn't hurt me by keeping secrets. You hurt me by not trusting me enough to share the truth. That's what broke us. Her words struck him like a punch to the gut. Jack had always believed that some things were better left unsaid. He had thought he was protecting Sarah by keeping certain truths hidden. But now, as he listened to her, he realized how deeply his actions had affected her, how much pain he had caused by withholding the truth. I should have trusted you, he whispered, the weight of regret flooding his chest. I should have let you in. But I didn't know how. Sarah's eyes softened, but there was still a distant look in them, a sign that the wounds of the past hadn't healed. I know, Jack. I know you didn't mean to hurt me. But the truth is, we can't change what's already happened. We can't go back and fix the mistakes we made. All we can do now is learn from them. Jack nodded, though the words didn't bring him any comfort. He couldn't undo the damage, couldn't erase the years of lies and unspoken words. The silence between them was thick, and Jack felt the weight of his own guilt pressing down on him. But in that silence, something else began to shift. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a recognition that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way forward. Maybe, with time, they could rebuild the trust that had been lost. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight, but for the first time in a long time, Jack felt a glimmer of hope. They had both been broken by their past, but perhaps they could learn to heal together. The future was uncertain, but in that moment, as they sat across from each other, something important had changed. The truth had been laid bare, and though it had been painful, it had also opened the door to a new possibility. Jack didn't know what the next chapter would look like, but for the first time in a long time, he was willing to find out. As the days passed, Jack and Sarah's unexpected encounter lingered in both of their minds. The conversation had left them both shaken, but it also gave them a sense of clarity they hadn't had in years. Jack found himself thinking about everything that had been said, everything that had been left unsaid, and he realized that something inside of him had shifted. There was a sense of responsibility that he couldn't ignore anymore. It wasn't about fixing the past. It was about acknowledging it and taking the necessary steps to move forward. For the first time in a long time, he knew he needed to face the consequences of his actions, no matter how difficult that might be. Sarah, on the other hand, felt a sense of relief she hadn't expected. The truth was out in the open, and while it was painful, it was also freeing. She could finally let go of the secrets that had haunted her for so long. There was no more wondering, no more guessing. She had the answers, and with those answers came a sense of closure. But closure didn't mean healing, not immediately. There was still a long way to go, and they both knew that. Sarah had always believed that time could heal wounds, but she also knew that it took more than just time. It took effort, understanding, and most importantly, trust. The one thing they had both lost over the years. Jack knew this, and he knew that he had a long road ahead of him if he wanted to rebuild the trust he had shattered. He couldn't just expect things to go back to normal overnight. It was going to take time, and it was going to take work. But for the first time, he was willing to do whatever it took. The next few weeks were difficult. Jack reached out to Sarah, trying to talk, trying to explain the things he had kept hidden for so long. It wasn't easy for him, and it wasn't easy for her either. Every conversation felt like an emotional minefield, but slowly, they started to make progress. Jack was learning to be vulnerable, to admit his mistakes without trying to justify them. Sarah, on the other hand, was learning to listen without judgment, to hear Jack's side of things without immediately shutting down. It was slow, but it was progress. One evening, as they sat together over coffee, Sarah looked at Jack with a soft smile. "I never thought we'd be here, you know," she said, her voice gentle. "I didn't think we'd ever be able to have a conversation like this again." Jack looked at her, a hint of regret in his eyes. I didn't either. But I'm glad we're here now. I know it's going to take time, but I want to keep trying. Sarah nodded, the weight of the past still hanging between them, but not as heavily as before. They weren't ready to be friends, not yet, and maybe they never would be. But there was a glimmer of something that had been missing for so long. Hope. They both knew it was going to take time, but for the first time, it felt like they might just have a chance at finding peace, at least with each other. And that was a start. As weeks turned into months, Jack and Sarah's relationship remained fragile but steady. The emotional wounds that had once seemed so deep were slowly beginning to heal, though they both knew it would take time to fully rebuild the trust that had been broken. They continued to meet, sometimes for coffee, other times just to talk. Each conversation was an attempt to understand each other's perspective, to acknowledge the pain they had caused and to seek some sort of resolution. It was during one of these conversations that Sarah brought up the topic of their future. "Jack," she began, her voice soft but serious. "Where do we go from here? What happens next for us?" Jack had been waiting for this moment, but when it came, he wasn't sure how to answer. The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. He had spent so much time reflecting on their past, on what had gone wrong, but now, facing the possibility of a future together, he realized he wasn't sure if that was something they could both handle. "I don't know," Jack admitted, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "I think we've both changed, Sarah. I don't know if we can go back to the way things were, but maybe that's not the goal. Maybe we just need to figure out what we can be to each other now, moving forward." Sarah nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "I agree," she said quietly. "I don't want to go back to the past either. But I don't want to leave things unfinished either. We both deserve closure, and maybe, just maybe, we can find a way to be in each other's lives again." Jack didn't know if he was ready for that, but something about Sarah's words resonated with him. They had spent so much time running from their issues, avoiding the tough conversations, but now they were facing them head-on. He could feel the weight of the decision that lay before him. "I'm willing to try," Jack said finally. "I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'm willing to see where it goes. I just want to make sure that whatever happens, we're both okay with it." Sarah smiled softly, the first genuine smile Jack had seen from her in a long time. "We'll take it one step at a time," she said. "There's no rush. We've spent so many years rushing through life, trying to fix everything all at once. Maybe it's time we let things unfold naturally." Jack looked at Sarah, feeling a mix of emotions, hope, fear, and even a sense of peace. They weren't there yet, but for the first time, he could see the possibility of a future with her, even if it wasn't the one he had originally imagined. It wasn't about going back to what they had. It was about moving forward in a way that worked for both of them. They still had a long way to go, but as they sat there, talking about their hopes for the future, Jack realized that the most important thing was that they were both willing to try. And that, in itself, was a huge step forward. Jack and Sarah's conversations had become a regular part of their lives. Though they had started out with uncertainty, they had both come to realize that these talks were helping them rebuild something they thought was lost forever. The walls they had built around themselves, over the years of marriage and then separation, were slowly beginning to crumble. It wasn't easy. The pain from the past still lingered, but there was a new sense of mutual respect. Each meeting brought them closer, and Jack could feel the weight of his previous mistakes gradually lifting. One evening, as they sat together in a quiet corner of the coffee shop where they often met, Jack looked across at Sarah. Her expression was calm, but he could see the subtle shifts in her demeanor. She had been through so much, and he knew she was still processing everything. "I've been thinking a lot," Jack began, his voice tentative. "About what you said that day, about us not going back to the past, but figuring out how we can move forward. And I think you're right. Maybe we don't need to fix everything right away. Maybe we just need to take it slow, and see where it leads." Sarah looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "I'm glad to hear you say that," she replied softly. "I know it won't be easy, and I don't expect things to be perfect. But I think the fact that we're even talking, that we're both willing to try, is progress. Jack nodded, the weight of her words settling in. They were both speaking the truth now. They weren't pretending anymore, weren't holding on to false hopes of picking up exactly where they had left off. This was a new beginning, one where they were both open to whatever the future might bring. The silence between them was comfortable, not awkward like it had been in the past. They had come a long way from where they had started. Jack found himself thinking back to when they first met, how much love had filled their lives. It seemed so long ago, almost like another lifetime. But even now, in the midst of all the change, he couldn't help but wonder if there was still something worth saving. He looked at Sarah again, her gaze soft, and he felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. I don't want to rush anything, Jack continued. But I think we should take a chance. Not necessarily to get back together like we were, but to rebuild something. Maybe not a relationship in the way we once knew it, but something new. A friendship, a connection, whatever that looks like. Sarah smiled, her expression warm. I agree. We don't have to force anything. We just need to see where things go. We can't predict the future, but we can make the choice to be open to it. Jack felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The pressure to have everything figured out was gone. For the first time in a long while, he felt hopeful, not because he thought everything would be perfect, but because they were both choosing to move forward with open hearts. They had both been through so much, and it was clear that their journey wasn't over. It would take time, but maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to move forward together, even if it wasn't in the way they had originally imagined. For now, that was enough. The future felt uncertain, but it no longer felt impossible. Over the next few months, Jack and Sarah continued to meet regularly, each conversation slowly chipping away at the walls that had kept them apart for so long. Their meetings were still somewhat awkward, yet there was a comfort in them now. They weren't rushing anything, but the trust that had been broken was gradually being restored, piece by piece. Jack found himself opening up more than he had ever expected. He had spent years guarding his thoughts and emotions, convinced that it was easier to keep everything inside than to confront the pain. But now, with Sarah, it felt different. He didn't feel judged or misunderstood. It wasn't about the past anymore. It was about understanding each other in the present, moving forward together, even if it was slowly. Sarah, too, had changed. The walls she had put up for so long were coming down, and for the first time, she was letting herself be vulnerable in a way she hadn't since their divorce. She had always been strong, independent, but she had realized that strength didn't mean closing herself off from the people she cared about. It meant being willing to let others in, even when it was difficult. One evening, as they sat together on the porch of a small cafe, sipping their drinks, Sarah turned to Jack, a thoughtful expression on her face. You know, I never thought we'd be here, she said, her voice soft. After everything that happened, I didn't think there'd ever be a chance for us to talk like this again. Jack looked at her, feeling a mixture of relief and hope. I didn't think so either, he admitted. But maybe this is what we needed all along. Maybe we needed to face everything, no matter how painful, in order to really move on. Sarah nodded, her eyes meeting his. I think you're right. We've both made mistakes, but I think we're starting to understand each other again. And that means something. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the world around them. It wasn't an easy journey, but they both knew they had come a long way. Neither of them knew what the future held, but one thing was certain. They were both ready to take whatever steps were necessary, whether that meant rebuilding their relationship in a new way or simply finding a way to coexist peacefully. As the evening began to wind down, Jack stood up and offered Sarah a hand. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm glad we're here, he said, a quiet sincerity in his voice. Sarah took his hand, a small smile tugging at her lips. Me too, she replied softly. They didn't need to know all the answers right then. What mattered was that they were finally facing the future with open hearts, ready to see where it would take them. The path ahead wasn't clear, but the important thing was that they were walking it together, and for now, that was enough. As the months passed, Jack and Sarah's relationship evolved into something new. They had long since accepted that they could never go back to the way things were, but that didn't mean they couldn't move forward. Every conversation, every quiet moment spent together, seemed to add another layer to their fragile connection. They were learning, slowly but surely, to trust each other again. Jack had always believed that time could heal all wounds, but now he understood that it was not just time that made things better. It was the willingness to confront the past, to face the things they had both been avoiding for so long. Sarah, too, had come to realize that healing wasn't something that just happened on its own. It took effort, understanding, and patience. Most importantly, it required a commitment to move forward, even when it seemed easier to stay stuck in the past. One afternoon, as they sat together on a bench in the park, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Sarah turned to Jack. "Do you think we'll ever truly be able to put everything behind us?" she asked, her voice thoughtful. Jack looked at her, his mind racing. For so long, he had thought that the past would always haunt them, that the mistakes they had made would be a constant reminder of their failures. But now, sitting here with Sarah, he felt a strange sense of peace. "I don't think we can ever completely forget," he said, his voice steady. "But I think we can learn to live with it. We can choose to stop letting it control us." Sarah nodded, her eyes softening as she looked at him. "I like that idea," she said quietly. "Living with it, but not letting it rule us." There was a long pause as they both sat there, lost in their thoughts. Jack felt a warmth spread through him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. It wasn't the intense passion they had shared when they were first together, but something deeper. A quiet understanding, a sense of peace, and a realization that, despite everything, they were both still here, still willing to try. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. As the sky turned darker and the first stars began to appear, Jack stood up and offered his hand to Sarah. She took it without hesitation, her fingers gently intertwining with his. It wasn't a grand gesture, but in that simple act, Jack felt something shift. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was the beginning of something new. As they walked away from the park together, side by side, neither of them knew exactly where the future would take them. But for the first time in a long time, they both felt ready to face whatever came next. The road ahead was still uncertain, but as long as they were together, they knew they could face it. And that, in the end, was enough.